Hello and welcome to this new digital course. Before I get started, I want to thank you guys for being so patient with me as I move these courses from being live to this digital format so that you guys are able to enjoy these on your own time frame. What was happening is that I was hosting these classes live and people that wanted to attend weren't able to because of time zone differences or availability. So I had this really great idea to convert these classes into this digital format, which you're watching here today, so that people are able to enjoy them on their own time frame, as I said. So before we really get started today on this class, which is all about understanding the ego and the subconscious mind, which is so very important, I want to start with a short little breathwork exercise, little short guided meditation, just to get you in the right mind frame, the right mindset to receive and process this information as we're working through it. Especially when we're talking about the ego, this content can be very triggering. And so starting out in a really nice relaxed body with a really regulated nervous system is key. And if you've worked with me one-on-one or you've attended any of my live events, classes, sister circles, etc., this is not going to be new for you because I open almost every single thing I do with some type of like breath work or meditation or something to bring us into our body. So I want you, if you're not already, to pause this video and get nice and comfy, slip into some comfortable clothes, excuse yourself to a place where you won't be interrupted so that you can really get the full benefits of this exercise and also of this class. Once you're ready, hit play and we'll go ahead and get started. So hopefully you've gotten nice and cozy now. You're in a comfortable seated, or you might even choose to lie down for a minute. Like I said, this is going to be really short. We're not going to spend a ton of time here, but just enough time to get you feeling really good. So I want you to settle in. You may let the eyes kind of drift shut right here. And I want you to focus on your breathing. That reminded me to like bring myself home to my own breathing, which when I lead you guys through these, this is as much for me as it is for you. So I get the benefits as well. So I just want you to take note at this point, like where is your breath at? Are you breathing really shallow? Are you holding breath? That's something we tend to do and don't realize. Or are you having these really nice, deep, delicious breaths? So right now, I just want you to kind of take note. I want you to be the observer of your breath, of your body. And as you're kind of sitting in this observation now, I do want you to begin to slowly lengthen your breath, to begin to breathe with intentionality here. So take one nice, long, deep breath in with me. And a nice exhale through the nose. And on this next breath, I'm going to guide you to taking a nice deep breath in through the nose. And I want you to release that breath with an audible sigh through the mouth. So what we're doing is we're doing a nice cleansing breath, a releasing breath. So a deep breath in here. An audible sigh. And again. One more time. I always say, don't be afraid to make sounds in your breathing. It's so cleansing, so releasing. So allow those sounds just to kind of flow from you as they choose to, really. So as we're kind of focusing on breath, I want you to begin to visualize with each breath in that you are drawing energy up from the earth into your body. So we're going to connect with Mother Gaia for a moment. We're going to use this energy for grounding. So deep breath in, and you're drawing this energy up from the earth. And as you exhale, I want you to imagine this energy now and breath flowing down the back of the body and back into the earth. So the idea with this breath cycle is we're drawing this beautiful grounding energy up from Mother Gaia, and we are releasing anything that's no longer serving us on any level, cellular, any energetic cords, any energy we're holding on to, resentments, any lower vibrational energy that's being stored in the energetic body, the physical body. With that out breath, we're releasing it down the back of our body, and we're handing it back over to Mother Gaia to transmute into something beautiful and healthy for the collective. So I want you to do a few cycles of breath. You might even visualize this energy coming into your body through your feet as a green, beautiful light. So I want you to begin this cycle right now. So inhaling, deep inhale, you're bringing that energy up through the core, through the body, and exhaling down the back of the body, allowing anything to be released that needs to be released. And we don't even have to be aware of what we're releasing, just setting the intention that we're clearing away what no longer serves us will begin to move that energy that needs to be moved. So breathing in, beautiful breaths in and out. So I'm going to have you do this for just a couple seconds more. I'm going to take a few cycles of this as well and do it with you. I want you to relax the muscles of the body and notice where you may be holding. Consciously relax. I want you to set the intention that you've created this space for yourself, for your personal development, for your healing, to gain knowledge, to gain wisdom, to gain a greater understanding of self. And I also want to commend you for putting this time aside to devote to your spiritual and personal development practices to heighten your awareness. Every time you show up for yourself in this way, you are doing such a wonderful and loving service for the collective as well. Because healing the collective, as I always say, starts with healing ourselves. All right, so go ahead and let the eyes open up if they have not already. Join me here back in this space. Hopefully you're feeling all the beautiful benefits of that breathwork exercise. And that's something you can revisit anytime you feel scattered, you feel tense, anxious. Anytime you want to gather your thoughts or ground, that's a wonderful visualization and breathwork exercise you can lean on. So take this with you, put it in your toolbox, know that it's available to you. Our breath is one of the best tools that we have at our disposal, because it's a tool that's available to literally every single human being on the planet. Sorry. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is kind of what the purpose of the ego is and why do we have an ego? There is what I consider to be a toxic school of thought, but that's just my opinion. And, we're each welcome to our own, of course. But in my opinion, I feel like there's a real toxic narrative in the spiritual community around the ego. And there is this undercurrent and this discussion of wanting to kill the ego, or that we should be trying to accomplish or achieve what's called ego death. And the reason why I feel like this is such a toxic narrative is because the ego is our humanity. It's the piece of us that makes us human. It's one of our greatest tools and assets. As we observe our ego, we're able to learn so much about ourselves as a whole meaning as a spiritual being having this very human experience. So we don't want to kill off our ego, because to do so is to deny a sacred piece of ourselves. To do so is to deny our own humanity and almost attaching the shame around being a human being that's imperfect. And I like to say perfectly imperfect, because as long as we're in these bodies, there is no such thing as perfection. But if we came here to be perfect beings, what would be the point? We need this aspect of our humanity because, as I said, it offers us so many opportunities for growth, for learning, for healing, for self-love. The more that we're able to embrace and love and honor all aspects of ourselves, even the ones that we maybe aren't always so proud of, even the ones that we feel cause us to maybe fall short of perfection, because we all fall short of perfection, as I said. But when we can learn to love these pieces of ourselves wholly, completely, accepting these aspects of ourselves, we've really then conquered what it means to embrace and embody true self-love and radical self-acceptance, which is a huge part of all shadow work, which is a huge part of the learning journey. So self-love is one of the four pillars of healing, and not just self-love, radical self-love. So when I say radical, that's what I mean. Radical self-love of accepting every piece, every part, every experience, every mistake, honoring that, loving ourselves through it, giving ourselves gentleness and space to be human. That's radical self-acceptance and self-love. So that's, to me, the goal that we're trying to get to, as opposed to trying to get to a place where we're completely denying this really sacred and important aspect of our journey here. We came here to learn. We came here to experience contrast. We came here to observe ourselves and others in this human condition and take and expand on a soul level. So to kill off our ego, it would make this entire journey of humanity pointless. So the purpose of our ego, like I said, is to connect us to this human aspect. It's to give us the opportunity for growth. Now, originally, if we go back here to our ancient days, to our more primal days, when our brains were less evolved, when we were having to fight every day for survival, our ego was actually in place to keep us alive. So without this aspect of ourselves, as a species, we would not have been able to evolve to the space we're in now, because the ego's also kind of back there in that more primal part of our ancient brain that is also in charge of our like fight or flight. Now, a lot of times we experience in these days fight or flight over things that really aren't life-threatening because we're disactivated. But you know, there was a time when our survival was dependent on that fight or flight. We were having to be mindful of predators. We were having to strive every single day to find food, to nourish our bodies, to survive, basically. And so our ego really served us in that way by alerting us and keeping us almost in this fearful space, because during this time of our evolution in the early days, we really did need to be in a kind of more alert state, more aware state, kind of centered in fear. Unfortunately, now as we've evolved and our societies and communities have evolved, and we have all of these things taken care of for us. Like we have grocery stores now. We're not having to hunt and gather, or even most of us maintain our own crops even. That came a little later on, obviously. Now it's a matter of getting in the car and driving down, you know, usually a couple miles, a couple blocks. And, you know, we have all of these options to choose from. Most of us no longer are in fear of predators. We have shelters, we have safety measures that keep us really nice and safe. So the ego hasn't had a lot to do. And that's why we see so many people continuing to live in fight or flight, because the ego's overactivated, because the ego no longer has to worry about these aspects of our survival But because the whole purpose of the ego is to keep us alive by keeping us what it deems as safe, now we're having all these anxieties and worries over things that don't matter, that truly aren't putting us in these life-threatening situations. However, the body, the brain is all responding to these situations as if they're life and death. And that's when we know we have an overactivated ego. So the really great news is the more that you're able to understand your ego, love your ego, observe, and that's the key in all shadow work, is we want to become the non-judgmental observers of self. So the more that we're able to begin this non-judgmental process of observing the ego, we can begin to build this really beautiful relationship. And when our ego is overactivated and trying to convince us that we need to be afraid of this, or that, we can now stand in this place of observation and say, actually, I've got this. Actually, this is a life-threatening situation. So you can rest, I'm taking care of us. And we can then deactivate that ego so that it's not causing us to live in these dysregulated states, because it really affects the nervous system more than anything. So that is why ego death is not the goal. The goal is always observation. So like I said, fear is at the root of all acts of the ego. And like I also said, initially that fear was really needed. We needed to have that alertness, but now we don't need it as much. So anytime the ego's rearing its head, and it doesn't always calculate as fear. Sometimes it's competitiveness, jealousy, feeling energy of lack towards self, like I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. Jealousy, resentment, competitiveness. These are all energies and attributes of the ego. But when we trace each one of these things back, which I'm going to teach you how to do today, so that's the really good news. When we trace each of these things back, when we observe them and then get curious about, okay, without shame, right? Okay, maybe I'm feeling really jealous. This person has something that I really want. Why don't I have this? This is some of the narrative that we often have when we're centered in ego. Why not me? Why them? Why not me? We all of a sudden get in this really competitive space and we start to see people as competition instead of allies. But once we observe these things, we can now take these thoughts and trace them back. So someone in that state of mind who's maybe really steeped in an energy of jealousy, they might have a fear that they're never going to receive the things that they want for themselves. They might have an underlying fear that there's not enough to go around for everyone. That fear of lack causes a lot of this stuff. So we can always trace, even if it shows up as anger, resentment, jealousy, competitiveness, judgment of others, we can always trace it back to fear, because at the root of all of the ego's manifestations of energy, it always comes down to fear. So one of the most common messages, like I said, shows up in this fear way. But as you begin to observe, you can then kind of begin to sort through. So those are some of the common messages of the ego. The ego shows up a lot, like I said, jealousy, resentment, anger, comparison, not feeling good enough, feeling less than, concern, worry, and fear too. That's another one. Sometimes, we've seen this, especially with everything going on in the collective since 2020 hit, since the pandemic hit. We haven't had a lot of information, and a lot of people have just been so activated in a fear space, understandably so. So there's no judgment here. This is understandably so. So many of us have been worried about our loved ones, our health, our businesses, our communities. We haven't been able to socialize in the way that we need as human beings to feel satisfied, to get all that's needed. And also some of us are stressed about money. I mean, we've all been hit hard, right? Inflation continues to rise. The cost of living continues to rise. So it's natural that the collective ego is going to be really activated during this time. And that all trickles down to us in an individual level. So sometimes it does show up just in that way of fear. But again, we're kind of fearing things that aren't necessarily life or death, but the ego has us convinced that these things are life and death. So we become really activated in that energy. So we begin to integrate our ego, which is always the true goal, by loving our ego, by accepting our ego, by appreciating our ego and being thankful for our ego. That's how we begin the integration process. And the more that you're able to see your ego as this separate entity, as human beings, we are so complex. We are so layered. We aren't just this one little thing in a box. We're expansive. By our very nature, we're expansive. And we have all these aspects. So you might feel sometimes as if, it almost sounds like I'm implying we have split personalities, but in some ways, these aspects are just little pieces of us that make up a whole. And the more we're able to kind of compartmentalize different aspects of ourselves for the sake of observation, the easier it is for us to stop identifying with these pieces of ourselves. Then we can really kind of slip into the role of observing from our highest perspective, aligning with our higher selves and viewing ourselves with love and acceptance from this perspective where we're not identified with that voice. So that's why the curiosity and the observation is so important. The first step is observation, non-judgmental. So going back to that example, I would say, oh, I'm observing, this feels kind of icky. I'm observing that I am being really judgmental. So let me trace this back. Why am I being judgmental? Oh, now I'm observing through this curiosity, through asking these questions, that this judgment's coming from a place of jealousy. So the next question, why am I feeling jealous? Let me trace this back. I'm feeling jealous because this person has something that I want. And I feel like I'm trying so hard, like I'm putting my best foot forward, and yet these things aren't coming to me. Well, why does that make me feel afraid? We keep on with these questions. Why does that cause me to feel fearful? Well, that causes me to feel fearful because I fear that I may never have what I desire. So then we can just take it from that observation, tracing it all the way back through curiosity, through questioning, without feeling shame, without stopping that process. And this is what happens so often as we begin the process. Ooh, I feel icky. I'm noticing that I'm being really judgmental. Well, right there, the ego activates again and says, I should be ashamed. I can't even look at that. It's too hard for me to even acknowledge that I might be imperfect. I always laugh at this because we can ask any single human being, do you think you're perfect? And 100% of the time, and I rarely talk in absolutes because I don't really believe in them, but this is one absolute. 100% of the time, the person will answer, of course not. I know I'm not perfect. But yet, when it comes to facing our imperfections, our ego traps us, it blocks us. It tells us that we should be ashamed, that we should feel embarrassed, that somehow being imperfect makes us not as good, less than. So that's the first step, is really at that very first point of observation. That's when the radical self-love and acceptance comes into play, where we can say, ooh, I feel kind of gross or icky inside, or this doesn't feel good because I notice that I'm gossiping about this person or I'm judging them in my mind. So as long as we can stay in that kind of not identified state of mind, we're able to then trace that back with curiosity. But a lot of times we shut it down right there because we're too uncomfortable to look, because we don't want to be uncomfortable, because this is uncomfortable work. So getting comfortable being uncomfortable is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself. And it is like skin crawling uncomfortableness at times. When we're looking at these aspects. But that's when we have to remind ourselves that I love and honor myself fully. Let that mantra guide you through all of this work. I love and honor myself fully and completely, all aspects of myself. So write that down, grab your little notebook, write that down. And as you're going through these shadow work processes, through these classes, through even just this work, Let that be your anchor every time you feel like you're trying to identify or shut down right at that beginning stage of observation. So again, I love and honor myself fully and completely. That will hold you through. So the process of integration comes through that love and acceptance. So a nice little trick that I picked up along the way, and I'm sure there is someone out there who deserves credit for this, but honestly, I have no idea where I heard it from. Just over the years of doing this work and study, I picked up on this trick and now I share it with all my clients. It's also in and in case you haven't had a chance, my new shadow work journal and guide for beginners. Guys, this is on pre-sale until March, released on March 1st. I really poured my heart into these exercises. I love shadow work. So grab yourself a copy, but it's also this exercise. You'll also find it in that book as well. But a really great way for us to stop the identification process of identifying with the voice of our ego is to name our ego. And this will feel very silly at first. If you're not used to doing this kind of work, if you're kind of new to this type of work, I will say a lot of this work feels silly at first. It feels uncomfortable, like I've already said, but also you kind of feel like ridiculous doing some of it. But I encourage you to push through it because there are such wonderful benefits. And in time, you begin to feel super comfortable doing all these things, talking to yourself in the mirror, making eye contact, hugging yourself, loving yourself, naming your ego. You get way more comfortable with all this stuff with time and practice, right? So naming, excuse me, I'm so sorry. So naming the ego is a really great tool for you. So my ego's name is Mildred. So anytime I notice Mildred getting real revved up, I literally call her by name. Mildred, what's going on? What are you afraid of? And I'm going to walk you through some processes here in a little bit, 3 steps to soothing the ego. But I follow those 3 steps that I'm going to share with you and calm her down and love her and remind her that I love her. And talk things through with her. So it really is like we are having these conversations, and it's the same thing with inner child work. I'll have that class out at some point in a few weeks, within a few weeks to a few months. I have so much going on right now. Not a few months, within a few weeks, but before the end of March. But it's the same thing when we're having these conversations with our inner child. We really do begin to build relationships with each aspect of ourselves, and calling it by name takes away the power, first of all, of the fear behind our ego. So I want you to pause this video for a moment. Hopefully you've grabbed a journal. If not, I forgot to mention that at the beginning of this video. Pause, grab yourself pen, journal, bring that to all these classes. You're always going to want those with you for taking notes. But I want you to think of what your ego's name is going to be. And this will be the name that you're going to call your ego going forward. So maybe you pause this video for a moment to think about it. Don't overthink it though, guys. Just take whatever comes to mind. It's not so important what the name is. It's just having almost this label to identify this aspect of yourself. So don't overthink it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Take whatever comes to mind and just roll with it. That's what I say. So, like I said, having this ego named helps you to recognize the voice of your ego, and it helps you to create this beautiful, loving relationship. Let's see, I'm referencing notes. I'm sure you guys have figured that out by now. So yes. Let's see what else. This tool will also help you. Oh, right. So the more that you do this, the easier it's going to be to also recognize the voice of your ego. One of the things I get asked so often from my clients and from people is, how do I know what the difference is between the voice of my ego and the voice of my intuition? Because these 2 things get very confused. And when we're identified with our ego, and you can see this out in the world, there are a lot of people out there claiming that they're having these intuitive hits, these intuitive thoughts, and it's really all ego based. So the more that you are able to recognize the voice of your ego, the easier it's also going to be to recognize the voice of your intuition. And a really good gauge of this is if it's based in fear, it's from the ego. If it's based in love, it's from your intuition, it's from your higher self. And that's the easiest way to differentiate between the ego and our higher selves and our intuition. The ego is focused on self. Your higher self, when you're aligned with your broader perspective, is focused on the collective. So if at any time your thoughts are focused on self-elevation, needing to be titled, needing to fit into boxes, all of these things, that's a safe bet. It's coming from ego. When we're identified with our higher selves and we're receiving beautiful intuitive messages, it's always focused on the collective, on our oneness, on what's for the highest and greatest good of all, even if that doesn't always benefit us at a personal level. And that's how you know the difference between those two voices. But the more that you work on building this relationship, the more you'll just boom, boom, boom. You'll be able to recognize it quicker and quicker. You'll have to spend less time kind of trying to sort it out, and you'll know right away, oh, that's my ego. Let me go ahead and follow these steps that Kelly told me in class so that I can calm this chick down or guy down or whichever it may be within yourself. So this tool will help you with that as well. So I want you to begin using this name on a regular basis. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is kind of how our conditioned thinking creates toxic cycles, how this ego, this basis of like, this voice of ego, I guess I should say is the word I'm actually trying to find here, create these limiting beliefs that we have, because at the crux of every limiting belief, at the crux of every toxic cycle, of everything we feel like we can't get ahead of. Like, I talk to so many clients who are like, I know that like going out every weekend, and I'm just going to use an example, but I know that like going out every weekend and drinking myself into obliteration is not serving me. I know that I feel like crap for like the following 3 days. I know that my vibe is lowered through this act. But I can't seem to stop it. I continue on. I can't seem to stop this process. At the heart of every single toxic cycle that we feel like we can't break is a limiting belief, is a conditioned way of thinking. Because remember, a belief is just something that we have said over and over again, that we've come to believe. And I always say, don't believe everything you think, okay? So that's also part of that identification process, becoming disidentified with every single thought we have, and realizing our thoughts just as our emotions. And hopefully you've had a chance to check out my first class on processing uncomfortable emotions. But our thoughts, just like our emotions, they come, but we don't have to get attached to every single one. So the more practice we have standing in observation of all of these things, the better we are for it, right? So we can observe these thoughts and say, that's really interesting, but I don't think I really identify with that thought. So why did this show up for me? What lesson is this teaching me? What am I to learn? And start to view these things like that. But just because we have a thought, and just because we've believed that thought for a really long time, or thought it over and over for an extended period of time, doesn't mean that it's true. So that's how we begin to challenge ourselves, to challenge our limiting beliefs, to challenge our conditioned thinking, so that we can grow past this and break these cycles, break the chains that are holding us bound to these cycles. That's the work, guys. That's the crux of all shadow work, really. So the more that you work with this, the easier it's going to be for you to begin to break these cycles that are no longer serving you, and create new, healthier cycles that are being produced from healthier thoughts, because then you can pick and choose. This thought is not too great for me. I'm going to choose now intentionally to replace this thought with something that's more serving to me, with something that elevates my goals, my mission, something that supports those goals. So that's how we begin to live intentionally through this work. We make choices, we observe, and we choose differently. if needed. So that is how our conditioned thinking and limiting beliefs spurred from our fear and ego mind goes on to create these toxic cycles. So I'm going to share with you 3 easy steps for soothing the ego here. And I've shared these in a couple other places. It will also be in your workbook. But the 3 easy steps is 1, we're going to acknowledge the ego with love, and we're going to honor the ego's request to be heard. So just like all of us, right? We all have, every human has a desire to be truly seen, to be truly heard in our authenticity. Now, not all of us are brave enough at this point to always step into that role. Because being vulnerable is scary, because when we put ourselves out there, we don't know how we're going to be received by others. And that fear based from ego, stops many of us in our tracks from showing up vulnerable, right? But the ego wants the same things. So we don't want to be dismissive of our ego, just like we don't want people being dismissive of us, right? We want to acknowledge whatever the fear is. So I'll go back to this original example because I've rolled with it this whole time. That first step would be acknowledging, oh, I'm feeling kind of judgmental here of other people. All right, so I might say, Mildred, why are we feeling this way? But first of all, I'd say, Mildred, I hear you. I hear you. I honor how you're feeling. I honor this is showing up, and I love you despite it. So that's how we kind of acknowledge. We kind of like get really specific on what's showing up, and then we honor it. We hear it out. We'll give our ego the space to kind of express to us everything that wants to be expressed around whatever's showing up. The second question is we ask, so I would say, Mildred, what are you so afraid of? So then we ask our ego, what is the fear? And this, like I said, I kind of went through this process with you guys already in this video. This might be several questions that are leading you to this answer. So you need to remain curious through this phase, curious and also loving, as I've already said. So that's step 2. What are you afraid of? And we want to dig and dig and dig until we get to the absolute root, vulnerable truth that our fear is stemming from. Okay. So keep digging at it, keep working at it, keep loving everything that's showing up. It's layers. We're peeling them away one at a time. Okay. Third, now that we've gotten to the crux of the fear, so going back to that example, I'm afraid that I may never have these things that I desire. I'm fearing of lack. I'm fearing that there is lack. I'm fearing that I'm not worthy, whatever that shows up as. Now we reassure our ego. So this would be the time I would step in and say, Mildred, what's meant for you is always going to find you. There's more than enough to go around for everyone. Just because someone else has something that you want, Mildred, doesn't mean that we can't have that too, because we can. So I want you to know, Mildred, I love you. I honor you, but I'm also wanting you to believe that everything's going to be okay, that we don't need to worry about this any longer, that we can trust in the universe to deliver to us exactly what's needed and exactly the perfect timing. So we can also trust that right where we are right now is exactly where we are meant to be. And just as you begin to have these conversations, you'll notice this loving, calming, more gentle energy take over, and you successfully soothe the voice of your ego through this process. So the last thing I'm going to share with you, which is something that I share with every single one of my clients, it's part of my 8-week trauma coaching program that every client must do. So I really encourage you to also give this a try, but I've coined the term and created this system, which I refer to as mind mapping. And like I said, this just came to me over years of like doing this work. And I realized I'm such a structured person, believe it or not. And that comes really in handy when I'm creating my programs and not even my programs, just when I'm creating steps for myself. If I can get it really structured, I'm able to work really well in that way. So it might not be for everyone. Not everyone's as structured, but give this mind mapping a try. What you're going to do All right, so let me just get into kind of the subconscious aspect of this. We have no idea what's really happening in the subconscious mind. We only are aware of about 5% of what's happening even around us, right? The brain kind of decides what's important and it completely discards the rest. And it's kind of all happening in the back of our mind here. So a lot of times the this stuff we aren't aware of, these things that are impacting our lives, that are creating these toxic cycles, that are keeping us feeling stuck, that are keeping us feeling unhappy, that are keeping us feeling anxious, fearful, depressed. These are all stemming from some subconscious thoughts that are happening that we have no awareness of. So then how do we bring that awareness in, right? How do we bring more awareness in if we don't even know we're having these thoughts? Thankfully, we have an amazing tool for tapping into the subconscious. That's our emotions. Our emotions are always kind of telling us what's happening on a subconscious level. So by bringing your awareness to your emotional shifts, you're able to then pause and kind of dig out what's happening in the subconscious. So for this mind mapping exercise for 1 week, at least, and maybe longer, you gauge it, but do not do this for less than 1 week because it creates a blueprint. It literally creates the map of your subconscious mind. So you want to have like a nice length of time so that you're able to get that picture really nice and clear for you. So you would want a notebook to carry around with you over the next week, something small that can fit in a purse, pocket, back pocket, bag, whatever, car. And what you're going to do is when you notice an emotional shift in a direction that doesn't feel good, or if you really want to look at, I mean, you can do this both ways. So if you want to record the positive emotional shifts, I encourage you to do that too. But if we're trying to kind of dig out more of the toxic narratives, you're going to really be focused on energetic shifts that happen emotionally that don't feel the best. Okay. So when you notice the shift happen, you're going to take a little note. What did you experience? So going back to this example, I'm just going to roll with this the whole way through. I noticed that I felt not so good all of a sudden. Then I started to feel that judgmentalness coming up, and having that judgment of others left me kind of, it lowered my vibration. It made me feel a little bit scared, a little bit sad, a little bit worried, whatever that is. So you're going to document that. And then you're going to pause and say, now, what was the exact thought? What was I thinking? Or what happened externally that caused this emotional shift? So another really great thing about this is we're also paying attention to our external and internal at the same time. So you might look at this at the end of the week and say, oh, every time I was around Sarah, I noticed that my vibration dropped a little bit. So that's kind of a cue. Maybe Sarah's not too great for me. Maybe Sarah's not a vibrational match for me. So it also kind of gives us clues about what externally we need to maybe shift, where we need to create more boundaries in our external world. So you're going to first ask yourself, is there anything externally that contributed to this shift? And then the next question you're going to ask is, what was the exact thought that I was having when I experienced this shift? And for the first week, don't even try to analyze or dig in, okay? It's literally just observation. So stay neutral. You're not trying to figure anything out during this first step of this process. All you're doing is you're literally recording what the emotional shift was, if any, external factors that played into it, and what were the internal factors in the form of what thought was I having at this exact moment. You're going to take note of those 3 things, and you're going to do this for a whole week. So like I said, you'll want to have your notebook ready because these things happen during the day, and you should be able just to do quick notes. Okay. You're not having to write a whole journal page here, a quick note so that when you do reference it, you're like, oh yeah, I remember that. So what you'll find at the end of this week, or however long you choose to do this exercise, is you'll begin to see a pattern emerging here. And like I said, this pattern could have to do with external things, kind of guiding you to where boundaries need to be set. But you should also begin then to see a pattern in your internal dialogue. So is a lot of that internal dialogue self-sabotaging, self-loathing, not centered in love towards self? Is it based on conditioned thinking that you've had from something that happened to you in childhood, from something your parents passed on to you that maybe you don't really necessarily vibrationally match with anymore, but you've been thinking it for so long that you've just accepted it as your truth. So that's the whole process of this mind mapping. It literally creates a blueprint and a map for you to have an idea of, where do I need to focus on? Where do I need to work on? So is it self-love? Do I need to work on boundaries? Do I need to work on acceptance, surrender, etc.? And these are all just examples. So that's how the mind mapping exercise works. I really encourage you guys to explore this and go deep with it and see what shows up for you. And do let me know how it goes, because I'm always really excited to hear. So you'll have all of this information in your workbook that you've downloaded with this video as well. So don't feel like you have to necessarily remember every single thing. Luckily, you have a recording of this, but also all of this information is available to you there. So I am going to close this video by kind of assigning you some homework. So you are going to be practicing being the non-judgmental observation of your ego and doing this with love and acceptance. I want you to lean on those 3 easy steps for soothing the ego when you notice that the ego is activated. I want you to continue sending love to your ego and building this relationship. So begin having that dialogue I talked about and loving your ego through it. And then lastly, your homework is going to be to do this mind mapping for at least 1 week. And then after that, you can begin to kind of decide what your next plan of action is going to be with the information that you've gathered. So you guys, I just want to thank you for purchasing this class, for joining me. I know there are so many options out there for coaches, teachers, all of these things. And the fact that you chose to allow me into your life, into your home, into your space, there really are no words for how honored I am to do this work and how honored I am that you've allowed me to do this work with you here. If you feel like I really need work on this, I really do, I need this one-on-one work, I have open availability starting in March to take on a few new clients. I can probably handle about 5 more, I would say. And that's give or take, depending on how my schedule kind of shapes up. But I do have space for one-on-one clients if you feel like, oh man, this resonated, but I need more. I need more and more and more. The benefits to that is you get to work with me one-on-one, and we get to talk about your specific needs. And I help you create a beautiful game plan based on this mind mapping, to help you kind of get to where you want to go, to help support whatever big goals you have. So I'm here to support you. If you feel like you need that deeper, more intensive one-on-one training, please reach out. There's never been a better time. Invest in yourself, invest in your health, invest in your personal development. You will not regret it. Miracles freaking happen when we invest in ourselves. So once again, thank you so much for joining me. As always, I'm sending out so much love to each and every single one of you.